All right, everybody, welcome into another live Coffee and Celtics edition. We are live on YouTube, live on Twitter. For today's show, there's a new face coming to Boston. We're going to talk about the Celtics non-trade deadline move, but they did make a move yesterday, so we're going to talk about that. They fall again at home. We'll touch on that briefly, and then we're going to pass the rock NBA trade deadline style. Make sure that you have all of our thoughts on all the moves that went down across the league yesterday. This is a Coffee and Celtics edition here, agreeing with Envy. You guys know the deal. Let's lock in. What up, what up, what up? Welcome into another edition of Green with Envy, a Friday Coffee and Celtics that is, of course, sponsored by Wood Island Media. Wood Island Media, a powerhouse production company for the past decade, specializing in celebrity, branded, and social content, based in Los Angeles, but roots in Boston. As always, this is your boy Will. We are checking in. How you doing? How you living? Joining me as he does each and every time, my best friend, co-host, and the coach of our podcast, the one and only Greg Manakis. Greg, we got a lot to get into on this one. Excited to do it. I'm excited. I'm trying to bring the energy for this Friday morning. I'll say that.
Why trying? You should have a ton of energy. Trade deadline was crazy. Meg the Stallion is going to be in Boston walking down them streets. So I think you should feel pretty good, my man.
Yeah, no, I feel pretty good. And believe me, so this is a 2-4 day here on Green with Envy. So we're doing this right now and then dropping later, early evening, late afternoon on YouTube. We'll have a Celtics Knicks preview with Jonathan Macri of Knicks Film School, friend of the podcast. He and I recorded a preview on Wednesday, and you'll certainly hear a lot of excitement in my voice then, coming off a Cavs win that had the juices flowing. And so we'll have that for you if you listen on the audio stream as well. That should be there probably late Friday night, early Saturday morning. So make sure that you go check that out. But yeah, I don't know, a little bit of mixed based off that game last night. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's not the thing that we want to lead with today. What we want to lead with is from the trade deadline yesterday, and we're going to hit all of the different moves that were made around the league. But we sat there kind of waiting, Greg. Are the Celtics going to make a move? Few days before the deadline, I believe it was just the day before, Wednesday, Celtics do move Jaden Springer. Jaden Springer gets sent to the Rockets. Subsequently, he got cut from the Rockets, so he is now on the open market. But Celtics do that and essentially shave about $15 million off of their $65 million tax bill. However, they do dip immediately into the buyout market and go and bring in Torrey Craig. So let's talk a little bit about the Celtics' new addition, Torrey Craig, what you need to know about him playing for the Bulls the past 2 seasons. And as you alluded to, most importantly, is dating Megan Thee
Real hot girl shit. Real hot girl shit, man. I mean, I am very excited to have Meg the Stallion in Boston. I think that it's
okay. Let's just be very clear. Having Meg the Stallion in Boston, sorry, Torrey Craig, that's way more exciting than whatever you're bringing to the table. It just is. There's just no doubt about it.
It's pretty great. Can we read the message that was in our group chat? I'm not going to say who sent this message, but there was a pretty funny message that was sent out in our Celtics boys group chat last night.
If you trust yourself to censor, go for it.
Let's see. So at some point last night, this was said. Oh shit, he's dating Meg the Stallion. Oh, baby, me and blank found love at Boston Calling. Grab some top deck yellow seats, and you can still see that thing.
Shorty, what that thing do?
Meg the Stallion, she's pretty good. She's pretty good.
Good shout out to Torrey Craig, man. Shout out to Torrey Craig.
I mean, that's got to tell you something about the quality of man that we're bringing in here to Boston, coming off the bench. I mean, he's probably staying in shape. Dating Meg the Stallion.
Listen, only played 9 games this year, but I'm sure that man's getting cardio. You know what I mean? I don't think we got to worry about that. I think he's gonna be just fine. So this is the Celtics move, essentially. Jaden Springer out, Torrey Craig in. the finances are the
Yeah.
finances. They probably save a couple $1,000,000 in that transaction on taxes. But this is the move the Celtics make. And ultimately, Greg, with Torrey Craig, there's two things that really jump out to me. One, he's played 9 games this year. He's actually shot the last 3 seasons around 40% from three, over 42, just under 43% this year on 4 attempts. Again, he's only played 9 games, averaging 12 minutes per game on a team in Chicago that at this point I feel like is going for the Guinness Book of World Records for the most mediocre NBA franchise in history. I just don't know what that team is doing. 19 point guards, still not trading assets when they're going nowhere. They make literally no sense. And so as it with the buyout market, I think we always kind of make a little bit bigger deal of some of these guys. So I'm not expecting a guy who couldn't crack a mediocre Bulls rotation consistently to be able to come in here and do something crazy. But what I think this is finding finally that O'Shea Brissett replacement from last year's team, as that was the only piece that didn't come back. What it tells me is Jaden Springer, because he couldn't shoot, wasn't going to be that guy, a little bit smaller. Jordan Walsh, they don't believe he's ready. Drew Peterson, they don't think he's the answer. That's basically what this move tells me. And that Torrey Craig is, let's give it a shot. He's going to get some spare minutes. And I think as regular season depth, I think this is a pretty solid move. I know there's been a lot of people in Celtics Twitter, Celtics Nation, that have wanted the Celtics to go for Torrey Craig, even when it was trading Jaden Springer or maybe a late second round pick to do it. So I know this is going to be a popular move, and I think it's a pretty risk-free move, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, Torrey Craig's a decent player. He adds positional depth, which is something that the Celtics did not really have on the wing. He adds a little bit, and you mentioned the O'Shea Brissett. It kind of fills a little bit of the Grant Williams void that's been left.
Yeah.
Since Grant left the Celtics, we haven't had that like 3-4 hybrid. Torrey Craig can't size up the way that Grant Williams did in guard fives. Like, you're never going to see him get a primary matchup against Nikola Jokic, but he is somebody that you can throw out there and trust to play solid defense, trust to hit like a decent clip from the corners. And he's always somebody that I've liked. He's 34, so he's lost a little bit of that athleticism that he had when he came into the league that made him kind of like a really interesting piece. I think he started his career with the Nuggets. I liked him on the Nuggets. He was on the Suns for a little bit.
Yeah, he's kind of bounced around a little bit.
Yeah.
Little brief stint in Milwaukee, then Phoenix for about a year and a half, 2 years. Indiana, back to Phoenix.
Yeah,
So he's kind of
he's a
bounced
decent
around.
player, and I think it's an upgrade over O'Shea Brissett because he can shoot better than O'Shea Brissett, not quite as like chaotic as O'Shea Brissett. I think he's going to be a nice, steady veteran presence off the bench. And I'm excited. I feel like I'm talking very like calmly about Torrey Craig right now, but I am excited to have him on the squad. I think that it's an upgrade, and we haven't had wing depth in a few years, so it's nice to see a little bit more depth on the wing there, and I'm excited to have him on the squad.
Real hot girl shit.
That's what we're really excited for. But no, I agree. Torrey Craig, solid move. It's funny, Brad literally, when he did his press conference after the deadline ended, he was like, he just basically, it was a pretty boring day. Like, it sounded like he understood. He's like, what was I going to do? Like, I'm not going to make any moves. I joined the guys over at Celtics Talk Weekly yesterday for a little bit of their trade deadline coverage. Good time. Shout out to those guys. But I know at one point they were a little upset. There's because there was a lot of people in there, but there's a few people that were a little upset about, we're just getting rid of money and we're just like, we're not doing anything. I'm like, guys, what is there to do? Like, unless you're willing to put Drew Holiday on the table now instead of maybe in the offseason, like, there's not really much that you're going to be able to do because you can't aggregate salaries. You're going to have to match it exactly or take back less. And you got to find players that if you're going to trade in Peyton Pritchard's on such a good contract, you're not trading him. Sam Hauser, even though he's been a little bit up and down this year, you're still not really going to get enough value back from just moving him that it would make sense. So unless you wanted to go down that, that rabbit hole of really starting to tear down this thing because of financial restrictions, there wasn't going to be much you could do. Brad kind of made that known in his press conference and did mention, hey, our goal is to go get a wing. And by the second quarter last night, he signs Torrey Craig. It was pretty funny. I don't know if you saw the clip of Jaylen Brown being asked about it. And Jaylen Brown obviously had no idea because it happened during the second quarter of the game. So, I think this is a really solid move for a Celtics team that Torrey Craig potentially, where his most of his cardios come off the court this year. Maybe he can, maybe he'll have a little bit more in the tank that he can come on a night, which will help transition us to talk a little bit about what happened last night against the Dallas Mavericks, where the Celtics in a quasi NBA Finals rematch. As we all know, since the AD Luka trade, this is a very different Mavericks team. They had no AD last night. They had no PJ Washington last night. They had no Derek Lively. Story that we have heard before with the Celtics team, and they win 127-120. Dropping the Celtics to 16-10 at home on the season. Greg, I don't know what to make of these anymore. Sean Grandy had this tweet over the last couple of road trips the Celtics have had. 3-1 Western trip blown out at home by Sacramento. 3-1 Western trip, lose at home to Houston with a bunch of just late game, blown coverages. Last night, 3-0 road trip, down 21 after 3 at home to Dallas. Throw the white flag. The stay ready group comes in and puts up a valiant effort. It's the steady ready to play group really put in a solid effort towards the end of that game to bring it close. But Celtics shot the ball well. They just didn't play good defense, and they got beat by a combination of Dante Exum hitting 4 threes, Dinwiddie looking awesome, Najee Marshall scoring 20 points. Like, I guess it's an anomaly. I don't know. I don't know what to do with what happened last night.
I love how you really are riding the emotional roller coaster of the Boston Celtics 82 game regular season so much more than I am. I just don't care about this game, man. We beat the Cavs in the game that mattered.
I don't know how else to cover this team every day if I'm just like, it's whatever. Like, it's just that's just so boring to me. Like, I don't know.
It's
like,
also,
then every podcast would be the same if I came in and did that.
Right. But I mean, that's just truly how I feel. I'm not going to say some bullshit just to say some bullshit.
No, I agree.
I think that this game to me didn't matter. The Celtics beat the Cavs. They have the Knicks coming up on the road. It sucks that they lost. Like, I would prefer that they win, but they proved in the game that mattered. They forced the Cavs to go make a trade that we'll talk about that here in a second. And when we do the trade deadline recap, but they proved against the Cavs that they are still the team to beat in the Eastern Conference. We were just at the game in Dallas where they smacked them in Dallas, right? Like, this game coming back, there's no Luka. AD's not in the game, coming off of a road trip. They weren't up for this game, and it showed very clearly. Like, they weren't ready for the way that the Mavs played. The Mavs came out and did what we've talked about, right? This is the issue with this team. When teams play with pace, the Celtics have a hard time putting in that effort and getting into the track meet, getting back in transition. The Mavs killed them in transition, 21 transition points in the game. And it's frustrating to watch as a fan. I hear you. It's frustrating to watch as someone who covers a team. I hear you. But at the end of the day, the game that mattered just happened against the Cavs. The other game that matters is happening tomorrow against the Knicks. This was the definition of a trap game. And the Celtics, for whatever reason, do not see the trap. Every single time there's a trap game, they step
Caught off guard by the trap.
they step right into that pile of leaves and they fall down into the trap again. And they're like, shit, we're in the trap again. Right. And then they just like jump out. They pull some, who was it? Myles Garrett, who jumped out of the pool. Right.
Yeah.
Or was it
Supposedly he's looking for a trade out of Cleveland. New England.
Yeah, I think it was Aaron
Please go
Donald.
get Myles Garrett.
Yeah, just like jumping straight out of the pool, jumping straight out of the trap.
You're 1000% right, and I know that, and that's why it's like I don't know what to say about this game because you're right, it doesn't matter. So that's why it's like, I mean, honestly, I've started to like if my wife wants to do something during certain games that I kind of assume the Celtics are going to do this, I'm like, yeah, that's fine. I don't need to like derail. Like, we don't need to like. I can catch this game later.
It's the perfect game to start late. Right? Like, you have YouTube TV. Yeah, you have YouTube TV. You can get your shit done that you need to get your shit done. Like, for me, it's taking care of the baby. And then, you texted me like, oh, what happened in the first half? I was like, I haven't started watching yet because I can just fly through the first half and then catch up by the fourth quarter. And that's how I watch a lot of Celtics games now with the baby. But in general, I think games like that were meant for it. One thing I did want to bring up, though, about this game that I think is newsworthy is Jrue Holiday was out. Jrue Holiday out again with that bothersome shoulder. There's reports that he's going to miss extended time, potentially the game against the Knicks and beyond. Will, as someone who has horrible shoulders, I just want to pull up a little graphic here.
Oh, look at this.
Little graphic of the shoulder. Okay,
Hopefully you
so
guys are watching on YouTube.
the actual injury I checked out is a shoulder impingement, right? So from
Mhm.
my knowledge of what a shoulder impingement is, that is a rotator cuff injury, and I believe it's those highlighted in yellow parts right there, right? So Drew Holiday's injury is like some rotator cuff instability where every once in a while it'll flare up on him and he's unable to really like lift his shoulder up over his head comfortably, which can explain a lot about Drew Holiday's poor shooting this year because it's in his shooting shoulder and he's just been struggling to deal with the shoulder impingement. So, are you concerned long term about Drew Holiday's shoulder impingement injury? Because they keep saying it's something he's just going to have to deal with the rest of the
Yeah.
year. I'm thinking we just rest him. We don't need him right now. We can
Yeah.
figure out a way to get through the regular season. We need Drew Holiday to be the Drew Holiday from last year, not this diminished version of Drew Holiday. So, like, I'm very happy we sat him last night. I want to sit him through the All-Star break. Just give the guy a couple weeks off. He's looked exhausted ever since coming out of the Olympics. So, like, why not just give him a couple weeks off? Let him come back fresh after the All-Star break. I think every single person in Boston will be fine with that because the Drew Holiday that we've been watching lately hasn't been a fun watch.
Yeah, it's not been the Drew that we need, and that's where, back again when we get to the trade deadline here, it's like, what was this going to do? Shop Drew Holiday? His value is not very great right now, right? Like, so even if you wanted to pull that trigger early, like, I don't really know what you're getting because he hasn't been that same Drew. So yeah, I'm with you. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's one of those injuries that you said he's just gonna have to deal with, right? Like there's not necessarily
You don't
does
get
rest help to
shoulder
heal it or
surgery. You don't
right?
get unless he has a torn rotator cuff, which is
Yeah.
possible. They may be underplaying what it actually is. You don't get surgery on shoulder impingement. It's just
Hmm.
like I think you had this a couple years ago where you had a hard time lifting your arm
Yeah.
over your head, that you had a
Mhm.
shoulder impingement. Like that's all it is. That's all it is. I have torn labrums and rotator cuffs in my left shoulder, had surgery on my right shoulder. Like I'm well aware of the issues that shoulders can cause. I've played for 15, 16 years with a torn labrum in my left shoulder. You can get it fixed if you want. It's going to pop out from time to time. That's not even what Drew Holiday has. He just has some inflammation in his rotator cuff,
Mhm.
possibly a torn rotator cuff if they're not actually telling us everything that's wrong with it.
Yeah, rest Drew Holiday. I couldn't agree more. Like I just don't know. And the Celtics are starting to be very open about how tired they are from like this long journey. Jalen already is talking about the break, right? We still have about 4 more games before we hit the break. And he's like, man, we really need it. At one point in the broadcast, it might have been the TNT broadcast, I talked about how Derek White got a game off. I think it was the game after the Mavericks game that we were at that he just kind of got a night off. They listed it as whatever. And Derek White's been playing so much better over the last 5-6 games, right? Like we're seeing the Derek White, and we talked about this on the last during the Cavs game. Like this is the Derek White that we're like, hey, this is a borderline all-star right here that you guys need to take seriously. He's been a lot more of that guy the last 5-6 games. And they had a report where he was like, yeah, I didn't have the joy for the game for a little bit. I don't know why I lost it, took a game off. And like, I feel right back to it. And, you could at least, for even feeling like last night was a little bit of a letdown, you saw Derek White look like, he was ready to play.
Mm-hmm.
And you even when we were watching the bench squad try to make a comeback, even then it was like, hey, if we get a little bit closer here, I know we took everybody out, maybe put Derek back in. Maybe Derek will have a chance here. But and we got a comment here from our guy Phil. Not having Drew does hurt the team defensively, and it showed last night. Yes, and to be honest, no. Like I don't think Drew reputation has been living off a little bit of reputation this year. Like he hasn't been bad defensively, but we talked about this a week or two ago. I can't really think of too many times this particular season when I've seen the Drew Holiday that I'm like, that's the first team all defense just wreaking havoc, Drew Holiday. And again, I don't think he's been bad, but I don't think him not being there, especially in the game last night, like where you were talking, Greg, like he's 34 years old. He wasn't going to be the guy that's like, all right, I'm getting up and down. Let's go. Like it's it's a Thursday, February 6th. I'm ready to get after it. Like that wasn't going to happen. So Phil, appreciate the comment. I don't know that I agree that his defense was what we sorely missed. I mean, we were missing some defense, but I don't know that he would have solved a lot of that. Would be my take on that.
Yeah, appreciate the comment, Phil. I mean, to play devil's advocate, like the way that we were getting cracked off the dribble, like there's an argument that having more versatility with the Mavs being as small as they were matches up better against that Mavs team than going double big, right? So like there's
For
an
sure.
argument to
Yeah,
be
Cornette
made
was a
there.
problem. So like
Oh,
that was
Cornette was
another one.
god awful in that game, but that's
Yeah,
also
I
like a
mean,
little bit on Joe, right? Like
yeah,
Joe, like
probably more
you
of a
got to
Kata matchup.
yeah,
If
you
you're
got to
gonna be a
recognize that Cornette was getting cooked. Like in that third quarter when the Celtics were like really trying to make a comeback and it looked like they might get the game to, maybe 10 points, 7 points, Cornette was always the guy, the weak link in the defense. And it was just really frustrating as someone who like caught up to the game and was hoping for another comeback to see Cornette just getting cooked over and over again. I was like, he's not the guy to have in the game right now, Joe. I don't understand why he thought he was. But, Kata played well in the fourth quarter. I thought Jordan Walsh played well in the fourth quarter. It was good to see him out there.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I want to keep an eye on once we get past the break is some of Joe's decisions, because he's saying like, hey, the real season, it's kind of like that old school Patriots mentality. Like what you do after Thanksgiving is what matters leading into the playoffs, right? Like that's the momentum that you need to have. So I do want to keep an eye on some of Joe's decisions once we get past the break and everyone has a chance to reset, because I think he's made some questionable choices at time, but again, none of this has really mattered to this point. So
well,
let's
I mean,
see.
like if you're using the regular season as scrimmage time, right? And if he wants to see, okay, here's the game, a team goes small against us, can Luke hold up in a 5-out situation where we're switching?
Yeah, this is the game to do it. Yeah,
this is the game to do it, right? And he tried it, it failed, so he has a little bit more evidence that that's not something he'll go to when it really matters.
Yeah, it's a good point. So we'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, Celtics, big game Saturday at MSG against the Knicks. That should be a hell of an environment. Celtics getting back to where they do succeed plenty, which is on the road, where they've been an elite road team, the best road team in the NBA this season by a pretty decent margin. So that will be a fun one. As I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I have a preview with Jonathan Macri of Knicks Film School. That will be going up on YouTube later today on Friday, late afternoon, early evening, and then across Spotify, Apple, wherever it is you listen to podcasts, probably late Friday night, early Saturday morning. So make sure you check that. But for right now, and the remainder of the time that we got for this show, NBA trade deadline passed yesterday. We're going to pass the rock right now. Cue the clip.
You guys ready?
What's the plan, Bobby?
We're winging it, Jerry.
Yeah! I got the rock now! I got this motherfucker now! What?
All right, Greg. Passing the rock NBA trade deadline edition. Way I see this, we'll just pass the rock. Bring up a trade that you want to talk about, and then I'll bring up a trade I want to talk about, and we'll hit as many as we feel like we need to, and then we'll call it. But Greg, you're up first, and you already got something on the screen here. So let's jump into what you want to get into.
Our boy Marcus Smart is in basketball purgatory. He's going to be playing basketball with Jordan Poole for the rest of the season. He's in Washington. He can't really get bought out because unless he goes to a team that's under one of the aprons, aren't many teams.
And he's
right?
got another year in his contract too, so that's an expensive buyout. That's rare that will happen.
So Marcus Smart, just for everybody out there, maybe you didn't hear, Marcus Smart got traded. So I have, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on the audio, go to YouTube, watch us on YouTube for the next part of the pod, as we'll have some clips pulled up here and some images pulled up. So the Wizards acquire Smart from the Grizzlies. The Wizards receive Marcus Smart, Colby Jones via the Kings, Alex Len via the Kings, and a 2025 first-round pick via the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies receive 2 second-round picks, Marvin Bagley III via the Wizards, Johnny Davis via the Wizards, and the Kings receive Jake LaRavia via the Grizzlies. Will, what are your thoughts on this trade? How do you feel about poor Marcus living out the rest of the season in Washington?
It's a tough beat, man. It's a tough beat. I mean, there's two things that jump out to me. One, Brad Stevens looks even smarter for making the move on Marcus when he did, right? Like you look back, Smart brought back 2 picks he brought back to the Celtics 2 picks, 2 first-round picks, and Kristaps Porzingis a year later, like barely a full year later. He played, I think, 31 or 39 to somewhere in the 30s total games for the Grizzlies. They have to give up a first-round pick just to get him to the Wizards. They had to get they got nothing from Marcus Smart essentially over the last year and a half. Nothing of note. And man, that it stings. I feel bad for Marcus. I hope this is, and part of it's probably injuries with Marcus, but I hope this is an opportunity for him to reset. Maybe in the offseason, the Wizards move him to a place that's just not with that team and that franchise and give him a chance to do something. But the Wizards, man, they're stockpiling veterans that I think they want to mentor their young guys, but I also question the strategy of, hey, let's take a bunch of guys who are on championship contending teams, put them on the worst team in the NBA, and say, please be mentors. I'd be fucking pissed if I'm Marcus Smart and Chris Middleton, and I just went from championship races to the bottom of the league, and I'm just stuck there for this year, wasting one of the few years I might have left. Like, I don't know. It wouldn't really put me in the mentorship mood. So I think it's an interesting move by the Wizards, and I just kind of feel bad for our guy Marcus.
Yeah, this is a tough beat for Marcus to be on the Wizards after playing at the highest level for his entire career, right? With the Celtics, always in the playoffs. Gets traded after the NBA Finals, right? No, gets traded. Was it after the NBA Finals? No, we had lost,
It was
right?
after the Eastern Conference Finals.
Eastern Conference Finals, right, against the Heat.
Yeah.
So gets traded after a year in the NBA Finals, Eastern Conference Finals run, ends up going to Memphis, where you're like, oh, we put Marcus in a pretty good situation, right? He's going to be there with John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. You could see him being the sixth man for that team and really bringing a spark off the bench, and it's just never healthy. And this comes back to the intel that was floating around out there that Marcus Smart's body was deteriorating at like an alarming rate. And the Celtics knew that they were really selling high on his medicals because he was just, had the body of a 35-year-old instead of a 30-year-old. Like that was the report that we had gotten wind of, right? So Marcus Smart, he had a great career. Unfortunately, for some guys, the end comes really quickly. And this looks like the end of Marcus Smart. And that's really sad to say. If he sticks in the league beyond the next contract, which like he might not even be motivated to do. He hasn't looked motivated since he got traded out of Boston. Like he's going to be signing vet minimums for the rest of his career.
Yeah, complete speculation. Looks like mentally he's had trouble kind of, as we say at the beginning of every show, let's lock in. I haven't really seen the times that I've caught Marcus Smart, because it's been few and far between over the last 82 game season, and then up to close to 50 games this year. Out of the last 130 or so games, he's played in the 30s, right? Like, so it's hard to catch when you're trying to catch him on the Grizzlies, and that's kind of a consistent Grizzlies thing. You really don't know who's playing any night you turn on the Grizzlies, but they're also very deep, very young, and they're trying to open up some space to make sure that they can pay Jaren Jackson, pay a few other guys that are coming down the pipeline. And so ultimately that ends up sending poor Marcus to Washington. And I mentioned it, so I'll just go here with mine, because we're talking about the Wizards here. Let's talk about the other move they made, which was Kuzma to the Bucks for Chris Middleton. And again, from the Wizards standpoint, I guess you want to Brogdon's fine being there, or you couldn't find good value for him, and you bring in Middleton, you bring in Smart, and your goal is to pair them with Jordan Poole and mentor all the young guys while you tank for Cooper Flag. I don't know. Good luck. Whatever. This is probably the last we're going to talk about the Wizards on this podcast the rest of the season. Let's go to the Bucks side of this. Middleton for Kuzma. Man, did I have a hard time wrapping my head around this. I think this is the beginning of the end for Giannis in the Bucks uniform. And listen, I've been saying since they made the Dame trade, the key to the Dame trade was not Dame. The key to the Dame trade was the health of Chris Middleton. That's always been the case for me. Like, that's the only way that trade was going to work out, is if you thought Chris Middleton was still going to be a version of Chris Middleton, which would have been an elite third third go-to option on a team, right? Because he's kind of had to masquerade during their championship. Him and Drew, who neither of them are probably ideal number twos, they were masquerading as that off and on, switching back and forth. And Middleton had his moments where I would probably lean that he was the number two on that team. But when you had that version as a three off of Giannis and Dame, that's some serious shit. And you even saw it in the Pacers playoff series the Bucks had last year, where finally Middleton looked healthy, but Dame and Giannis were both hurt. And Middleton nearly beat that Pacers team basically by himself, keeping the Bucks alive, having some crazy games, and then immediately has double ankle surgery in the offseason as soon as that ends. And he just hasn't looked the same. And I get that. But I think when I look, I mean, Kuzma is having the worst shooting season of his career. Part of that might just be a byproduct of playing with Jordan Poole and a bunch of young guys. Probably not a lot of great looks that you're getting. Haven't been locked into the Wizards to fully assess that. But the chemistry you're losing with Middleton just doesn't feel like it's worth whatever availability gap that Kuzma gives you over Middleton. Gives you a little bit more size, but I just don't see Kuzma being what solves this. I would have continued to bet on chemistry with Middleton and maybe catching lightning in a bottle like they did, when he finally got healthy by the postseason last year. I think this is a downgrade for the Bucks, and honestly, like it puts them. I'm still going to respect Giannis, but it lowers their bar for me as far as challenging the Celtics this season.
Yeah, shout out to Alex. He says that we Kuzma shooting 60.2% from the free throw line this year, down 12% from his career average.
And I believe he's around 40% from the field and 28% from three this year. So listen, Middleton was still shooting above 40%. For all the faults of his knees, he was still shooting much better. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think this is a complete desperation move by the Bucks. If I was a Bucks fan, I don't like it. As a Celtics fan, I think it makes them closer to eliminated than it does to contender.
Yeah, just for everyone, the full trade, Bucks trade for Kuzma. Bucks receive Kyle Kuzma, Patrick Baldwin Jr., Jericho Sims, 2025 second-round pick. The Wizards receive Chris Middleton, A.J. Johnson, 2028 first-round pick swap. The Knicks in this actually received DeLon Wright and cash considerations. So we haven't talked about this from the Knicks side of things, Will. They got rid of Jericho Sims, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jericho Sims.
Yep.
And then they get DeLon Wright in this deal. A lot has been made about the Knicks and all of their lineups being the most used lineups, like the 3-man combinations.
We touch on that with Macri in the preview podcast. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So like they needed somebody else that they could rely on off the bench. They get DeLon Wright, who hasn't really done much for the Bucks, but I've always liked him. He's kind of been a name when you see him in a trade. He's been moved around a lot recently. When you see him in a trade, you're like, oh, DeLon Wright, like he could make a little impact, and then he doesn't really make an impact. So I'm not really sure if he's going to make an impact with Tibbs, but he's at least another NBA body that the Knicks can throw out there. If, for example, a Jalen Brunson goes down for a 5-game stretch with like a shoulder injury or something like that, DeLon Wright's someone that can fill in there. Any thoughts on the Knicks side of this? Because I think you cover the Bucks side pretty well.
Not really, man. I mean, their front court is one of their issues, and so they just lost a body in the front court. So unless they feel confident that Mitchell Robinson's coming back soon, and you're going to have him and Precious on that front line, I think it's a little bit risky in that sense. But it seems like they haven't been super high on Jericho Sims for a little bit. He's been kind of rumored out there, and then DeLon Wright. I don't know, man. Probably doesn't really do much for them. Maybe if there's an injury, helps them spell it. But ultimately, Tibbs only plays certain guys, right? So it all depends if Tibbs actually wants to play him, which my gut tells me probably not, because that's just how Tibbs rolls. Tibbs has his guys and he rolls with them over and over and over again. So we'll see. Honestly, I think for the Knicks, they're kind of in a similar boat to the Celtics, where it was kind of a nothing deadline, right? Like you didn't do anything crazy that I think is going to be super impactful. You shifted a few things around, and you're basically in the same place you were before yesterday.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, back to me. I'm gonna go
Yep.
to the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team that we touched on earlier. They made a pretty big move. They trade for Atlanta Hawks, DeAndre Hunter, who we've seen have some good games against the Celtics, especially in the playoffs. Hawks receive Karis LeVert, George Niang, so we don't have to worry about punching George Niang in the face during the playoffs. 3 second-round picks and 2 pick swaps. We talked a lot about this after the last game, that the Cavs felt like they were one player short, especially on the wing. They saw exactly what we saw in that game, that they needed to make a move. And boy, did they make a move. I'm really high on DeAndre Hunter. I think that he is the perfect type of player to help the Cavs increase their ceiling from an Eastern Conference Finals team to an NBA Finals team. I think that he is switchable. I think that he can create his own shot. He can add a little bit more offense whenever Garland or Mitchell goes to the bench, and it's just like one of those guys running high pick and roll and everybody else get the hell out of the way. I think that DeAndre Hunter is the perfect guy to add if you were unable to go and get a Cam Johnson. You get a DeAndre Hunter. I think Cam Johnson was probably like their primary option at the trade deadline. They couldn't figure out a way to get him just because of his shooting. I think DeAndre Hunter matches up well against the Jaylen Brown. I think that Jaylen Brown's not going to be able to take him into the post and bully him like he did to everybody on that team that wasn't named Evan Mobley or Jared Allen, right? Like that's just what Jaylen Brown was doing to them. George Niang couldn't hang on the perimeter with any of the Celtics guys. If the Cavs went to the playoffs with George Niang being a main part of their rotation, and they were going to live with a Jason Tatum on an island against George Niang dancing on the perimeter, if I were a Cavs fan, I would have been really pissed that we thought that was a sustainable defense to throw out against the Celtics. So DeAndre Hunter, I think, is the perfect trade piece, and I think it actually decreases their salary. I think that Hunter salary is less than LeVert and Niang combined. I'd have to double check on that. Maybe Alex, you can see if it does anything for their taxes.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think this was an absolute home run move for the Cavs. It's like we said, I think we spent some time talking about Cam Johnson, but I think Hunter, if he's healthy, might even fit the mold of what they need more because he brings more on the defensive end, right? Like Cam Johnson is going to give you that spacing and scoring. I mean, DeAndre Hunter's averaging 19 points per game this year. It's his best season he's ever had as far as scoring the basketball. You've brought him up many times as being the main competitor to Peyton Pritchard in that 6th man of the year race. So I think this is a very significant move, especially when you look at giving up George Niang, who we couldn't agree more, just too much Niang. I then watched the Pistons and Cavs game where Darius Garland ends up hitting the game winner. Niang was all over the court in crunch time, just was a disaster. He fouled Cade Cunningham at one point. He missed a free throw. Like it was just, we can't have George Niang out here in these moments. We need more. And so, trading Niang, totally fine. LeVert's kind of become expendable with the emergence of Ty Jerome. Like he gives you another ball handler. He, he's not quite the same scoring burst, but is enough of a scoring burst. And when you have Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland playing at all-star levels, like LeVert's just kind of not really needed. So you're not really losing much from what you had, and you're gaining a whole lot. You're gaining what has always been missing from when you brought in Mobley and Garland, and you have Mobley and Allen. It's been that middle piece, right? Like they haven't really ever found that. They've tried to scotch tape it, glue it over with, the Max Struces, the Dean Wades, the George Niangs. And I think you keep Strus and Dean Wade, who I think are very good and serviceable rotation guys, but you don't have to rely on them. DeAndre Hunter is the best option out of those three. And so now if DeAndre Hunter isn't, if for some reason Strus is on a heater or Wade is, you can still play them, but Hunter is going to be the guy more often than not that's going to fill that gap. And I think the versatility that you touched on is probably the biggest piece that they didn't really have. Because if you only have to play with one big, and now you have to have a Niang, a Strus, a Merrill. You got to have 3 of those guys on the court. Now it's like if you only have to play with one big, Hunter, he can play up a little bit. He's a strong defender, so you can have him in there. Or if you can have one of Mobley, not Mobley, Garland or Mitchell because of size or whatever that might be, you can still remain pretty big and have shooting and have more versatility, more juice off the bounce than Niang's ever going to give you with a guy like DeAndre Hunter who can still kind of go get his own shot in a much better way than anyone else that they have. And so He's a perfect fit. He's a literal perfect fit. The health is going to be the biggest question. Is
Mhm.
he's been throughout his career, he's never played 70 games, right? He's never played over 67 games in an entire season. So that's
Mhm.
been the biggest thing. And this was, I think for Atlanta, why they were like, all right, let's see what we can get, and they get a bunch of second round picks, couple of swaps. They wanted to get as much as they could at a time where he's playing the best ball of his entire career. This has been the vision for DeAndre Hunter since they drafted him out of Virginia, has been what they've got this year. They've just not sure they're going to keep getting it. And for the Cavs, you got to make a move, right? This is the moment. This is the moment. Like the other seasons where let's figure it out. Last year, they were a little bit injury prone, other than that, big 20 game run where they won like 19 games in a row. Anyway, 19 games over, they were like 19-1 or whatever it was, that big stretch they had last year. There was injuries all around that. This year, you guys are healthy. They're the 1 seed. They're likely going to be the 1 seed. Celtics are 5.5 games back. Celtics are going to be in that next 2-3 matchup. Like that's looking like that's what we're heading for. You're going to be the 1 seed and have home court. You got to go for it. And this was a go for it move. And this is by far the move that I look at when I think about the trade deadline from a Celtics perspective, where I'm still picking the Celtics. We saw them versus the Cavs. We knew that this was a spot they needed. This closes the gap pretty considerably, in my opinion. Like I do
Yeah,
think
I
I
agree.
look at the Cavs in a different light.
I agree 100%. And then if you just think of like the Cavs need one stop, end of the game situation, out of a timeout, they can now throw a lineup out there that has Donovan Mitchell, that has Isaac Okoro, DeAndre Hunter, Dean Wade, who's an underrated defender, and Evan Mobley, right? That's a pretty solid closing five for one defensive stop. That's a lineup that you can't really pick on anybody out
Yeah.
there. If you try and like, who's the weak link in there? I guess you go at Okoro, right? Mitchell's hands are Mitchell. You could go at Hunter, you could go at Dean
Right.
Wade, but those are all guys that are gonna make your life hell. They're gonna really get up in your jersey. And if you don't believe in Dean Wade there, maybe you go Max Strus, who has shown that he can be
You got
feisty on the
options now,
defensive end.
right?
Yeah,
Like it's real options. Like George Niang was never a real option to me, right? He's a regular season guy.
yeah.
Karis LeVert, he can get you buckets at times, but that's still not a guy that you want kind of, when you're in the foxhole. DeAndre Hunter, if he's healthy, he's a guy that you want out there. And that's a real, when we look at who's the best fifth option in the league now, that's one of the best fifth options in the league. When you look at, starting fives or who are your 5 best players, that's a top of the league type of guy right here. And that's usually what championship teams have. So I think that's an amazing move for the Cavs. As long as he stays healthy, that definitely makes the Cavs much more of a contender. Anything else before I go to the next pass in the rock here, Greg?
No, let's go to the next one.
All right, next one here. Let's go to the saga that finally has come to an end. Jimmy Butler goes to the Golden State Warriors. Essentially, bunch of pieces moving around. Ultimately, Miami ends up with Andrew Wiggins and Davion Mitchell, Kyle Anderson, and I believe they got a protected first-round pick in this as well. The Jazz just always hanging around. The Jazz get a couple of pieces in this as well. Danny Ainge always trying to just pick off the scrap heap and take a couple of guys, get a couple of picks the Danny Ainge way. But Butler to Golden State, Wiggins and Davion Mitchell and Kyle Anderson to Miami. Let's talk about the Butler piece of this first, because that's the part that has been, just been blowing up the feed for the last couple of weeks, and really until the Luka news, thought that was going to be the biggest piece that was moved along with De'Aaron Fox. Butler to Golden State, I think it's interesting. I think him and Draymond, that will be, oh man, I don't know. That experiment's either going to go really, really well or really, really poorly. And I don't really think there's much of a middle ground with the two of them. When those two alphas, when you get them in the room, it's either going to be great for them or it's going to self-combust pretty quickly, I think. I don't know that it really changed my thoughts on Golden State. I don't really know that it does much. He's better. The upside of him is better than Wiggins. So I think it's worth it when you have Steph Curry and you're trying to find lightning in a bottle one more time. But I think it makes him a stronger play-in team. I don't know that from what I've seen from Golden State this year, unless Jimmy still has some, big time playoff Jimmy in his bag that we haven't seen in 2 years. If he still got that, maybe there's a chance. But it honestly didn't really do much for me, if I'm being honest, Greg.
It was fun. It's a fun trade. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
I'll tune in. I'll watch the Golden State Warriors. See Jimmy Butler and Draymond show. I think that will be, really enjoyable. But to your point, I don't think this makes them a title contender by any means. And I was just thinking about like Jimmy Butler, just adding him into the current Heat's lineup, right? Where the Heat are doing okay this season, even without Jimmy Butler.
Mhm.
Is that lineup worse than what the Warriors throw out there? Like, not not really. Like,
Yeah.
Bam Adebayo's better than Draymond. Tyler Hero obviously isn't as good as Steph, but Tyler Hero is playing really good basketball this year.
He made the All-Star team. He's having a great year.
Yeah, he's having a great year. So, like, I don't know that this does anything for the Warriors. I do actually kind of like it from a Heat perspective, like getting Andrew Wiggins. Did Kyle Anderson end up staying there?
That's what I couldn't remember. I think for now he is. I think. Alex, I don't know if you can double check on that for us. I think that's why as you pulled it up, I was reading and I was like, I can't remember if Kyle Anderson stayed there or not. But either way, Wiggins and Mitchell fit to their mold, right? Like
Yeah,
I think this is what I'll say. I think for the Heat
Kyle
perspective,
Anderson's in Detroit.
he's in Detroit. Okay, yeah, I thought he might have got moved again as well. I think with Wiggins and Davion Mitchell, I think it makes the Heat a stronger 7-6 seed. I'll say that, right?
I'm
'Cause
still gonna hate
especially if
playing them
Butler's
in the
not playing.
playoffs, man. I'm gonna hate playing them
Right.
in the playoffs. Like Andrew Wiggins has shown he can be Jason Tatum's kryptonite. That's like
Yeah,
kind of
and
kind of scary.
yeah, I mean, it's gonna come down to a lot of Tyler Hero and if Terry Rozier can avoid the Jonte Porter pull, if he can avoid that, like there a lot of their offense is going through the two of them, which in a playoff scenario, Tyler Hero, fine. Terry Rozier, probably not as much. I mean, Bam hasn't been quite him, but Khalil Ware's been popping off. So, I think Miami is a formidable 6-7 seed right now, right? Like where I said I'm down on the Bucks. Like I think Miami, at best they're done with the distraction, and now they can just be a gritty, annoying ass team to play that will pop you probably if you don't come correct. Like that's kind of how I view Miami after this trade. And like you said, Wiggins has been a guy that gives the Jays trouble, and so I think Miami will be interesting to watch as they kind of reset, and this will be a year where they reassess. Like, okay, how real is Tyler Hero as a lead guard? How real
Mhm.
is, even though he's a rookie, Khalil Ware next to Bam? Is that like a real double big that we can kind of go to? What is Nikola Jovic? Like this will be like an assessment season for them, and then Pat Riley's going to Pat Riley and try to pull something off. But one other part of this that I did want to talk about, Greg, is all of this was built originally around what could have been Kevin Durant going back to
Right.
Golden State,
Yeah.
and could have been Butler going to Phoenix. Wiggins still would have go to Miami. Apparently, that was Wiggins' destiny, was to end up in Miami. Two things. One, KD apparently shuts that down, doesn't want to leave Phoenix. The other part that came out was when Kyrie was asked about this, and he talked about his time in Boston and that famous clip of them at the All-Star game where KD and Kyrie are caught kind of whispering to each other in the hall. And that's where everyone's like, that's where they started, forming their plan to come together, which Kyrie admitted was 100% true. But the new fact, the plan was to come to Boston. The
Mm.
plan until things started really getting, deprecating and going downhill in Boston, the plan was apparently, let's try to get the two of them. So sign KD. In Kyrie's world, trade Jaylen Brown and assets for Anthony Davis. Keep Jason Tatum while he's continuing to grow. And potentially there's a world in 2019 where it could have been Anthony Davis, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and Jason Tatum. That was an interesting alternate reality to hear Kyrie speak so openly about.
Do we want to do that? Do we want to live in the hypotheticals of what
I
could
don't
have
want to live there,
been?
but it's an interesting note. I mean, shit, that's worth bringing up. That's interesting to hear. I'm not saying I want to go there, but
I
that is pretty interesting how open he was about like the plan was the three of us and a young JT in Boston.
Yeah, it's fun to think about, man. Like those hypotheticals, though, they just give me anxiety, bro. They give me anxiety thinking about like what could have been. It's like start thinking about like, oh, maybe if I had just like given her one more date, we could have actually been something like that type of shit. I don't
But
like
here's the
living.
thing. Here's the thing. We married a supermodel. We won a championship. So I don't think we need to like look at it as like
Exactly.
what could have been. It's more like that could have been fun. Okay, moving on. Like that's like remember that one night that hot chick at the bar? Like, dude, I kind of fumbled that one, but it's okay. Like I ended up with a supermodel and we're
Yeah,
married. We
we're
love
in the
life.
right spot. And both of
Yeah,
our wives are supermodels. So like we're all good. Shout out to Lore, shout out to Danielle. Like we're in a
yeah.
good spot. We're in a good spot here. I
We
got
never needed
beautiful.
Kevin Durant.
Never, you don't need Kevin Durant when you have Jaylen Brown, you have Jason Tatum and banner number 18. Like that's a pretty good reality to be living in. If we're living
Yeah,
in a simulation, like shout out to whoever's putting in the code.
yeah, we're in the right one. All right, we'll move on from this. Greg, go to your next one that you got here.
Okay, we haven't talked about this yet, right? We haven't talked about the Lakers getting Mark Williams, right?
No, we have not talked about this.
Okay, and I don't even think we've really like texted too much about it. For everybody that's watching on YouTube, we got it pulled up here. Audio feed, I'll read it out for you. Lakers get Mark Williams. Hornets receive Dalton Connect, Cam Reddish, the 2031 unprotected first round pick that everybody says should have been in Dallas, and the 2030 pick swap that everybody says should have been in Dallas. So you could make the argument that maybe the Lakers are overpaying to get Mark Williams, but when you underpay to get Luka Doncic, I feel like it all kind of evens out for them. I'm not going to lie to you and say that I've been tuning into a lot of Hornets games and that I've seen Mark Williams play more than like probably 3 or 4 full NBA games in my entire life. I do know I loved him at Duke. I think he's a hell of an offensive player when I've seen him play. I also know that many people say he's very overrated on the defensive end or properly rated as a bad defender for the
Mhm.
Hornets. So when you're thinking about what the Lakers could be this season, does Mark Williams actually make them a championship contender? If you're asking him to anchor your defense, by all accounts, he's not that guy at this point in his career. But maybe he's rejuvenated going to LA. Maybe he's just scratching the surface as a legit 7-footer with crazy measurables that he can, take the Lakers offense to a whole nother level, giving Luka that lob threat that he loves to play with.
Yeah, let's stick with this on the Lakers perspective here of bringing in Mark Williams. Like you loved him at Duke. The times that I have caught him, which again, this is kind of similar to what I was saying about Marcus Smart. A lot of injuries with Mark Williams, where he's been kind of in and out of the lineup. And I saw there was a report last night during their TNT game where Jared Greenberg talked about the Hornets being worried about a bad back. And that's part of the reason that Mark Williams has missed some games. He can't really get in the weight room consistently because of whatever this back issue is that has persisted. And that's pretty troublesome. From a Lakers perspective, though, I do think they probably overpaid. And we can talk a little bit about that here in just a second. I would be a little bit worried. Like, I like Mark Williams a lot. Like, I really think if he's healthy, I think this is a good move. And I think it also tells you that more than this is a move for this year, this is Luka's team. And this is a move to pair with Luka. This is not
Oh, yeah.
necessarily like if they went and got Clint Capella, I would have said, okay, this is we still think we're going for it this year. This is, hey, maybe he just gets, around these guys and takes off. And yeah, we could still do some damage this year. But this is a move resetting, telling you we're all in on the Luka future of the Lakers, right? Like that's
Yeah.
what part of this
And
move tells
who
me.
maybe part of it is like Mark Williams is going to be coming up for a contract extension. He hasn't really proven that he can stay healthy, similar to the Celtics and how they were able to get Robert Williams on a super team friendly deal because of
Mhm.
his medical history. Maybe this is something where they're looking at, we got Luka Doncic who we're going to be giving $60 million a year to, $70 million a year
Yeah,
to. But we also have Austin Reeves on a super team friendly deal, and we can get Mark Williams on a super team friendly deal. Two
right.
players that are going to play above whatever contracts are given to them if they can get Mark Williams on a similar contract to what the Celtics gave Robert Williams, like 4 for 40, 4 for 50. And with the new CBA and like all the shit and all the cap shenanigans that are happening for people to get under aprons and under tax
Mhm.
thresholds and all this stuff, I feel like we're at the point where people are going to start getting paid properly versus getting paid just to keep the asset. Like I really think there's like this shift
That is
where,
one thing that's coming. I think you're spot on with this. Like,
like
you're
Brandon
not
Ingram,
gonna
for example. We haven't talked about Brandon
yeah,
Ingram. The Pelicans didn't want to pay him. He's going to the Raptors. Brandon Ingram's not getting a max contract. Brandon Ingram might not get $30 million a year. Brandon Ingram might be a $20 million a year player. And Brandon Ingram at $20 million a year versus as a max contract player is a player that
It's a
I'd
great
want to
deal.
have. That's a great
Right,
deal.
that's
And
a
I
great
think
deal.
more players are going to start getting paid like a number that makes sense versus every single team being above the second apron, which is like where the league was trending. Like, and that's like one of those things that like wasn't making sense to me as all the CBA stuff came out. I was like, they can't just keep paying these like everybody $50 million
Right, like Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine's a
everybody's going to
really
be
nice
hard
player.
capped. Yeah,
He should not be making 50 million. Zach LaVine's a really nice player. Zach LaVine should be making 35 million, right? Or something, or 30. Like right, like there's just like different layers to this. And so I think you're spot on with that. And I think for the Mark Williams part of it, like if he's healthy and there is some injury concerns, they're going to get probably a pretty good deal with it. Biggest red flag to me would be if you had to think of someone to pair with LaMelo, wouldn't it be kind of the skill sets that Mark Williams has that you're like, as you're building out the Hornets, this is a guy, but they just, I mean, they got really good value. So that's the other side of this is that, like you said, this is everything that was left over from the Luka trade. So
that's
that's where it's
assuming
like,
they want to keep LaMelo as their franchise guy.
right. So that's kind of my other thing. I made the bold kind of silly proclamation earlier where I was like, Brandon Miller is the best player on the Hornets earlier in the season. I don't fully believe that yet, but I do think that there's potential that this move could signify that because it feels like when you're looking for who makes sense with LaMelo, I thought Mark Williams, if he was healthy, was a guy that lines up with that vision. Instead, they go get Dalton Connect, good shooter. They get the pick and the swap. How the Hornets could get a pick and a swap for Mark Williams and the Matt, God damn it, Nico Harrison. I
Because
just
like
don't know how that happens.
we'll come back to this again. We got to talk about the Luka trade again because why not?
This will be where we wrap up because only a few other. We're talking about Ingram now. Bogdanovich for Man was the only other kind of one, and I like both of those guys just going different places. But yeah, let's end on this here because this is the final point that we needed to wrap up this crazy deadline.
Right. So if you're just making the argument, Luka Doncic, what is he worth in the open market? Anthony Davis, what is he worth on the open market? Max Christie, what is he worth on the open market? And you like add those picks together and you do the math on the picks. Like you could hear Rob Pelinka making that argument to Nico Harrison and being like, yeah, it's probably about a pick difference. But when you think about all the teams out there that have like 20 first round picks that are available to them, like there's an argument that Luka Doncic could have gone for like 15 picks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you would have traded all your draft capital for Luka, not just the typical, oh, we traded 5 picks for him. Like, no, maybe somebody would have traded 10. Maybe somebody would have traded 12. Like you don't, because there are some teams out there that have just like copious amounts of picks. So
the Spurs gave up like 40% of their draft capital to go get De'Aaron Fox and still have 60% and kept Stephon Castle and kept Jeremy Sohan and kept, Devin Vassell. Like they would have signed up in 2 seconds to be like, here's Devin Vassell, here's Stephon Castle, here's 9 picks. Like,
and that's at least a deal you consider, but maybe the Mavs were like, oh, but that doesn't give us a guy to anchor our defense. For sure, and that's what we want. Anthony Davis. And then when you look at Max Christie last night, man, like Max Christie looked pretty good. He's 21 years old. Maybe that's a piece that a lot of people were kind of underplaying. Like he was the guy that was guarding Jalen Brunson in Madison Square Garden. He was like the primary guy guarding Jalen Brunson. So, maybe Nico Harrison, not as wrong as we all thought. He was wrong, but maybe not as wrong.
Hey, based on last night, he's playing chess. We're all just playing checkers.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
Maybe that is the case. That is the case. But fun deadline, man. A lot of moving pieces.
Fun.
This
fun.
is super. So here's the one thing that while the CBA makes it, I think, frustrating at times, there's 2 things that I think I'm taking away from it. One, you mentioned, I think it's going to start to really reset contracts to contracts that have to actually make sense. We're not just like, oh, you're up for it. Here you go. We'll trade you later. We'll kind of figure it out. Like they're going to have to start. And that's for the Raptors are going to be a great test case of this because I think they got Brandon Ingram at a very low price point. Great flyer. If they pay him 50, whatever he's eligible for next year, I don't think he's never made an all NBA team. I don't know if he can get up to 50 million, but let's say even if it's 45, like Raptors, that's a fucking horrible move if you decide to do that. But if you get his bird rights and you get him for 25 million, that's a really good move, right? Like for whatever you think, like of Brandon Ingram, the dude's a baller. The dude can play. It's just what is his actual value within that. And so I think that's one of the big things that we're seeing out of this, and that we're going to get really creative with a lot of all these multi-team trades that people used to propose during funny season, with all these different trades that were like, okay, guys, how often do you get 3, 4, 5 team trades? I think you're going to get them a lot, at least early days in the CBA, when you're trying to work around all the contracts from the pre-existing CBA. You're going to get a lot of this, and it's going to get weird, and it's going to be fun. I had a good time throughout it all yesterday.
Yeah, and if you just think about Brandon Ingram, so I'm looking at RJ Barrett's contract situation where like he's the second guy, right? If Scotty Barnes is the guy, RJ is probably their second guy. He's making 25 million this year, 27 million next year, 29 million the year after. If you're just looking at Brandon Ingram, you're like, hey, RJ is our number 2. Like, we look at you roughly the same value as RJ. We're not going to pay you more than RJ. So like,
Yeah.
take 25 million a year, or, see what you can get on the open market, because buddy, you're not finding more than 25 million.
Yeah, I think that's right. Be interesting to see. Interesting play. We'll have to check in with our guy S on that. See, I know he wasn't loving that deal, but we'll have to see how he's feeling about that before the end of the season. Greg, let's wrap this up here really quick. Super Bowl predictions: Chiefs and Eagles on Sunday. Who you got?
I got a Eagles fan that sits next to me in my office. Shout out to my guy Ryan Nixon. Just because I want to make sure the office has good vibes, I'm gonna go with the Eagles beating the Chiefs, preventing the three-peat. Saquon Barkley MVP.
Yeah, I would love to see Saquon have a big game. Really love watching that guy play. I don't know. I just assume Mahomes is going to get it done somehow, some way. Don't know how, but think he will. And then last call. What are your what do you think about Kendrick's halftime show? Are you excited for it?
Yeah. I like Kendrick. He's cool. Are you excited?
I love it, dude. I think Kendrick's going to put on a hell of a show. It's just I'm
I saw
excited
Kendrick
to see.
live one time, and it was boring as hell. So
Interesting. I've seen him live twice. Really enjoyed both times. And I saw you. I forgot
it
he
was
played.
during when he was doing the Kung Fu Kenny thing, and like
Mm.
I don't know, man. It was just like he had a lot of Asian people dancing around for him, and it was, I appreciate the respect for Asian culture
Cultural
and Kung
appropriation.
Fu.
Is that
A little bit,
what
a little bit. Yeah, there's like always the, for
Hey man,
as an Asian.
black people and Asian people have a lot of synergy over. I mean, it goes
Right,
back to the
right.
Wu-Tang Clan.
But then yeah, exactly. But then you get like some people looking at Chinese people and they're like, oh, why is that Chinese dude acting black or whatever? And it's like, yeah, but black people act Chinese just as much as Chinese people act black. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
feel it's just like kind of rub me the wrong way. But anyways, I like Kendrick.
All right. Well, we'll see. Hopefully, no Kung Fu Kenny in this one for for Greg on the Super Bowl Sunday. I'm excited. I'm curious to see what happens when he plays Not Like Us. That will be pretty interesting to see how that plays on a network television show. But it did win 4 Grammys, so kind of hard not to play it after a big night like that. So we'll see. Once again, guys, appreciate everybody for tuning in. Alex, the video intern, for dropping some nuggets for us in the chat today. Appreciate you hanging out with us. All of you joining us here on YouTube, Twitter, or listening afterwards. Appreciate you guys. As a reminder, if you're looking for a Knicks and Celtics preview for Saturday night, go check the feed. Either if you're on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts, it will be there late Friday night, early Saturday morning. And if you're looking for it on YouTube, that will be populating in the late afternoon, early evening. We got you covered. We'll be back probably sometime on either Sunday or early Monday morning. We'll have some more coverage for you of that Celtics Knicks game and look ahead to the final week of the regular season before we hit the All-Star break. We'll have all that and more coming up for you guys next week. Appreciate you joining in. Another edition of Coffee and Seas. Enjoy your weekend. Peace.